Picture this. It's the summer of 2009, and the United States government is handing out stacks of cash for something completely insane, destroying perfectly good trucks. The car allowance rebate system, nicknamed Cash for Clunkers, paid ordinary Americans up to $4,500 to trade in their old 4x4s. But here's the part they leave out of the history books. Before those trucks ever reached auction, dealers were legally required to pour a chemical solution straight into the crankcase, start the engine, and let it run until the piston seized solid, permanently gluing the bottom end into a lump of scrap metal. Nearly 700,000 vehicles were executed this way in just a few weeks, and a staggering number of them were exactly the kind of cheap, mechanically bulletproof compact off-roaders we're talking about today. Somewhere out there, a perfectly healthy 1992 Toyota 4Runner or a clean Jeep Cherokee had its engine murdered by federal mandate. Also, a family could roll into a dealership and drive out in something newer and, frankly, way less interesting. And yet, against every odd, thousands of these trucks survived. They're sitting in barns, back 40s, and online listings right now, selling for less than the price of a decent laptop, ready to eat every trail you throw at them. Some slipped through because owners refused to trade them in, others because they were already exported, and some simply because a dealer's paperwork never caught up with them before the program expired that August. This is your guide to finding one before somebody else does. So why does this window of opportunity still exist in 2026, in a used vehicle market where average transaction prices are creeping toward $50,000 for something with a windshield and 4 wheels? It's simple. Every single truck on this list was born before the era of touchscreen infotainment, drive-by-wire throttles, and computer modules that cost more to diagnose than the vehicle itself is worth. These are mechanical machines first and electronic machines a distant second, meaning a shade tree mechanic with a socket set and a free Saturday can keep one running practically forever. Body-on-frame construction, solid axles, and decades of junkyard parts availability make these trucks nearly immortal, and because the mainstream market keeps chasing shiny new crossovers instead, prices on these forgotten workhorses have stayed criminally low. Before we drop into the countdown, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we track down verified real-world bargains exactly like this one every single week, and you do not want to miss the next one. Alright, let's start digging through the bargain bin, counting down from the cheapest curveball all the way to the undisputed king of budget off-roading. Number 12 on our list is a genuine sleeper that most Americans have never even heard of, the Mitsubishi Pajero i/O. Introduced in Japan in 1998, this tiny 3-door 4x4 was actually styled by the legendary Italian design house Pininfarina, which is exactly why Europeans know it as the Pajero Pinin and Latin American buyers called it the Montero i/O. Under the hood, Mitsubishi offered a 1.6-liter 4-cylinder, a 1.8-liter 4-cylinder, and even a turbocharged version of that 1.8, all sending power through a genuine part-time 4-wheel drive system complete with a real low-range gearbox, not some soft crossover pretending to be a truck. Mitsubishi never officially sold the Pajero i/O in the United States, which is exactly why it lands at number 12 instead of higher up this list. But thanks to a federal law called the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988, commonly known as the 25-year import rule, any vehicle older than 25 years can bypass modern crash and emission standards for personal import. Mitsubishi kept building the platform all the way through 2007 for Japan and Europe, and even licensed it to a Chinese manufacturer that produced its own version for nearly another decade after that, which means parts are far more available worldwide than most shoppers assume. These little trucks are now legally flowing into ports on the West Coast straight from Japanese auction houses, often for the price of a used golf cart, and because almost nobody in America can identify one on sight, that ignorance is entirely your opportunity. Moving on to number 11, we've got the Daihatsu Rocky, and this one comes with a genuinely bizarre backstory. Daihatsu entered the American market in December of 1987 with exactly 2 models, the Charade hatchback and this boxy little off-roader, badged simply as the Rocky. It rode on a proper ladder frame chassis, came with a removable hardtop, and packed a 1.6-liter 4-cylinder engine shared with the larger Daihatsu Applause sedan. But the party was short-lived. After posting a $14 million loss in 1992, Daihatsu pulled every single product out of the United States for good, leaving the Rocky as an orphan nameplate with almost zero brand recognition, which crushed resale values into the dirt for decades. Internationally, the same truck sold under the names Feroza and Sportrac clear through 2002, and the Italian coach builder Bertone even built a limited run of high-performance variants powered by a BMW-sourced engine, proving this little box was taken far more seriously overseas than it ever was here. Gray market examples are now trickling into the States under that same 25-year import law we just covered. Nobody's bidding these up at auction because nobody remembers Daihatsu ever existed, and that collective amnesia is exactly why you can still find one dirt cheap. At number 10, we head to South Korea for the original Kia Sportage, launched in 1993 as one of the very first compact SUVs to hit the global market. This was old-school Kia, developed with technical help from Ford and Mazda, riding on a body-on-frame chassis borrowed from the Mazda Bongo commercial van platform, complete with a genuine live rear axle and a 2-liter Mazda-sourced engine producing around 130 horsepower in North American trim. Here's a fact for your next trivia night. The 1997 model year Sportage was the very first production vehicle on planet Earth fitted with a knee airbag, and for a few years in the mid-1990s, European market versions were actually assembled by the German coach builder Karmann rather than in South Korea. Back in the 1990s, Kia had almost no brand equity in America, still fighting off jokes about cheap Korean cars, and that stigma tanked resale values across the board. 3 decades later, Kia builds some of the most respected vehicles on the road, but this humble first-generation Sportage never got the memo, and clean, running examples can still be found for a few hundred to a couple $1,000s depending on rust. Sliding into number 9, say hello to the Geo Tracker, a badge-engineered twin of the Suzuki Sidekick that General Motors sold through its short-lived Geo brand starting in 1989. These little trucks were actually built at Kami Automotive, a genuine joint venture plant between General Motors and Suzuki located in Ingersoll, Ontario, Canada. Power came from a 1.6-liter 4-cylinder engine, and despite its tiny footprint, the Tracker came standard with a real 2-speed transfer case and low range, making it an absolute favorite among budget rock crawlers who value light curb weight over raw horsepower. Because Chevrolet marketed the entire Geo lineup as economy cars for young, budget-conscious buyers, nobody ever treated the Tracker as a serious off-road machine, and that image problem kept prices low for over 3 decades. Today, the lightweight that made it feel underpowered on the highway is precisely what makes it punch above its class on the trail, since less mass means less strain on axles, tires, and that little 4-cylinder engine under the hood. Number 8 brings us to the Suzuki Sidekick itself, sold from 1988 through 1998 and built alongside its Geo and Chevrolet Tracker siblings. Equipped with Suzuki's own 1.6-liter G16 4-cylinder engine producing somewhere between 80 and 95 horsepower depending on the model year, the Sidekick used a genuine ladder frame with solid front and rear axles on the classic 2-door models, a configuration that off-road purists still chase down today. Suzuki's reputation took a beating in the American press throughout the late 1980s over rollover concerns involving its smaller Samurai model, and even though the Sidekick was a wider, completely different, more stable vehicle, that brand-wide cloud of suspicion followed Suzuki for years and quietly suppressed used values across their entire lineup. The upside for you in 2026 is a devoted worldwide community of Sidekick and Tracker enthusiasts who still manufacture affordable lift kits, locking differentials, and larger tire packages, meaning your bargain bin purchase can be transformed into a serious trail rig without draining your bank account. Climbing to number 7, we've got the Chevrolet S10 Blazer, and this is where the horsepower numbers start getting serious. Early models launched with a rough 2.8-liter carbureted V6 making around 110 horsepower, but everything changed in 1988 when Chevrolet dropped in the 4.3-liter Vortec V6, a small block-derived engine that started at 150 horsepower and eventually climbed to nearly 200 horsepower with 260 pound-feet of torque by the early 1990s. This engine is legendary in truck circles for shrugging off neglect and routinely crossing 200,000, even 300,000 miles with nothing more than regular oil changes. Here's a stat that might surprise you. Government rollover data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration actually rated the S10 Blazer's rollover rate identical to the notoriously scrutinized Suzuki Samurai, proving this little truck was far more stable than its reputation as a cheap compact SUV ever suggested. Because it always lived in the shadow of flashier full-size trucks, the S10 never commanded premium pricing, and clean 4x4 examples remain shockingly affordable to this day. Number 6 is where things get a little controversial, the Ford Bronco 2. Produced from 1984 through 1990 and based on the Ford Ranger pickup platform, the Bronco 2 launched with a 2.8-liter Cologne V6 before upgrading to a 2.9-liter version, paired with Ford's unique twin traction beam independent front suspension for extra wheel travel on rough terrain. But here's the real story. In May of 1989, Consumer Reports magazine flat-out told its readers to avoid the Bronco 2, citing the same rollover concerns it had leveled against the Suzuki Samurai 1 year earlier. Government crash data later confirmed the Bronco 2's fatal rollover rate sat at roughly 19 incidents per 100,000 vehicles, more than 3 times higher than the Samurai it was compared against. That controversy tanked resale values for decades and eventually pushed Ford to replace it entirely with the wider, more stable Explorer in 1990. The silver lining for budget-minded off-roaders today is a mountain of cheap, shared parts with the Ranger pickup and early Explorer, meaning keeping a Bronco 2 alive is remarkably inexpensive, as long as you respect its limits and drive it like the vintage truck that it is. At number 5, we're crossing the Atlantic for arguably the toughest, cheapest 4x4 ever mass-produced, the Lada Niva. This Soviet-engineered off-roader, officially designated the VAZ-2121, launched all the way back in 1977, and almost unbelievably, it's still rolling off the assembly line in Russia in 2026, nearly 50 years later. Unlike almost every other truck on this list, the Niva uses a unibody design paired with full-time 4-wheel drive and a lockable center differential, originally powered by a simple 1.6 to 1.7-liter 4-cylinder engine making around 80 horsepower. And this is breaking news as we speak. the manufacturer, Avto VAZ, just launched a refreshed version called the Niva Legend on July 20, 2026, upgrading to a 1.8-liter, 90 horsepower engine and finally adding a driver's airbag and galvanized steel body panels to fight rust, nearly half a century into production. Because early Niva models are now legally importable under that same 25-year rule, and because the platform's sheer mechanical simplicity means virtually any garage on Earth can service it, running examples are showing up in American driveways for just a few $1,000s, offering go-anywhere capability that shames trucks costing 10 times as much. Number 4 might be the most surprising bargain on this entire list, the Land Rover Discovery, known to enthusiasts as the Discovery One. Launched in 1989 with a 3.5-liter Rover V8 producing around 152 horsepower, the engine grew to a full 3.9 liters by 1994, pushing output up to roughly 182 horsepower. Land Rover also offered a torquey 2.5-liter turbo diesel alongside the V8 in most world markets, giving budget shoppers overseas an even cheaper way into the platform. Underneath that plush, cream leather-lined interior sits genuine live axles front and rear on coil springs, a locking center differential, and some of the best approach and departure angles of any SUV sold in that era, making it a legitimately serious off-roader wearing a posh disguise. Here's the honest, data-driven truth though. Land Rover's later reputation for catastrophic electrical gremlins and expensive repairs absolutely tanked resale values across their entire lineup, and the humble Discovery One got dragged down right alongside its pricier siblings. That means you can now find a genuine British V8 4x4 for the price of a used economy sedan, but budget some maintenance money into your purchase, because that famous Land Rover reliability reputation, or lack thereof, is not entirely undeserved. Number 3 brings us into the 2000s with the first-generation Nissan Xterra, internally coded WD22. Built on the same body-on-frame platform as the Nissan Frontier pickup, the Xterra launched in June of 1999 with a base 2.4-liter four-cylinder making 143 horsepower, or an optional 3.3-liter V6 producing 170 horsepower, later bumped to 180 horsepower for the 2002 model year. Before drawing a single line, Nissan's own engineers reportedly spent months watching how real owners actually used their trucks at trailheads and surf breaks, then built the Xterra around that research instead of chasing suburban luxury trends. That approach paid off immediately. The truck wasn't just some econobox either. It walked away with the 2000 North American Truck of the Year award and Motor Trend Sport Utility of the Year trophy in the very same year, beating out the Dodge Dakota and the first-generation Toyota Tundra in the process. It even came standard with genuinely useful gear like a first aid kit built into the tailgate and a roof-mounted cargo tray. With a real solid rear axle and part-time four-wheel drive, this thing was engineered from day one for surf trips and trailheads, not shopping mall parking lots. Because the used market still views it as just another early 2000s SUV instead of the award-winning trail machine it actually is, prices remain refreshingly reasonable for something this capable. At number 2, right before we crown our champion, we've got the second-generation Toyota 4Runner, built from 1990 through 1995 on the same bones as the beloved Hilux pickup sold overseas. The engine to chase down here is the 3-liter 3VZ EV6, delivering 150 horsepower and 180 pound-feet of torque, paired with a genuine chain-driven transfer case and, crucially, a solid rear axle for maximum articulation on rough trails. Toyota wrapped this drivetrain in a chassis so fundamentally over-engineered that it single-handedly built the brand's reputation for indestructibility in the American market, a reputation that arguably still sells Toyota trucks today, more than 3 decades later. The catch, and it's a small one, is a known head gasket weakness on high-mileage examples if the factory recall wasn't addressed, so a pre-purchase inspection is worth every penny. Because the 4th and 5th generation 4Runners get all the modern attention and inflated price tags, this second-generation truck remains criminally underpriced for a vehicle that essentially never dies, making it one of the last true Toyota bargains left on Earth. And that brings us to number 1, the undisputed holy grail of budget off-roading, the Jeep Cherokee XJ. Launched in 1984, this was the very first unibody 4x4 ever built, ditching the heavy body-on-frame construction of every rival while somehow keeping genuine solid front and rear axles for real off-road articulation. In 1987, Jeep dropped in the engine that built a legend, the 4-liter American Motors Inline 6, initially producing 173 horsepower before a high-output version arrived in the early 1990s, cranking output up to 190 horsepower and 225 pound-feet of torque. This engine has been described by major automotive publications as being almost impossible to kill, with countless documented examples crossing 300,000 miles on nothing but basic maintenance. That same 4-liter 6-cylinder soldiered on in the Wrangler and Grand Cherokee for years afterward, so parts bins overlap across 3 different Jeep model lines. Jeep sold nearly 3 million of these Cherokees before production finally ended in 2001, meaning parts availability today is essentially limitless, and every independent mechanic in America already knows how to fix one blindfolded. It's affordable, it's everywhere, it's unstoppable in the mud, and it remains the single best answer to the question of what off-roader to buy on a shoestring budget. This is the truck that started the unibody SUV revolution, and it's still out there right now, waiting in some stranger's driveway for less than the cost of your next vacation. So there you have it, 12 genuinely bulletproof off-roaders that prove you don't need six figures to build a serious trail rig, just patience, a little research, and the willingness to overlook some rust and outdated stereo equipment. Which one of these are you hunting down first, and did we miss your personal favorite budget legend? Drop it in the comments below, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.